They did not refuse to help, because refusal would have meant making a choice. It didn't breach the defenses. It left no trace. It didn't look like an intrusion. It didn't breach the defenses. It left no trace. It didn't look like an intrusion. It wasn't even detected. It ended up inside existing data flows, between reports, briefings, and internal service requests, as if it had always been there, and it stood out in only one way. It couldn't be named, and anything that can't be named is more irritating than a threat. There was no subject line, no source, no timestamp, just a few lines, no greeting, no addressee, no attempt to persuade. We cannot participate in this process. Repeated inquiries will yield no result. At the Pentagon, the first response was confusion. The message didn't resemble a threat, or a demand, or a scenario. There was nothing to hold on to. This could be a simulation, the general said, or an attempt to make us react. Ivan Patel was brought into these discussions not for answers, but for knowing where they ended. Influence assumes a goal, she said. There isn't one here, at least not in the usual sense. Then what is it? Ivan looked at the screen longer than necessary, not for effect, just checking herself. She hesitated. This is... She stopped. The pause was unnecessary. Not a message. More like a notice. The general frowned. A notice of what? That the channel is no longer in use. She tilted her head slightly. Like passage closed, only without a door and without a sign. The wording went into an internal memo. They tried to classify the memo. First as external interference, then as atypical communication. Neither category fully fit. In the end, they marked it, requires clarification. That made it possible to postpone discussion. In the decision chain, it triggered nothing. You can't respond to an absence, but everyone tried. The president was preparing an address to the nation. Drafts were rewritten again and again. Each one had a reason. Each one had an audience. That was exactly why none of them worked. The main thing is not to change the tone, someone said during review. People need to hear something familiar. The tone did come out familiar. It assumed that what was happening could still be explained. In the end, they kept it neutral. A period of uncertainty, limited information, the need to maintain stability. The name Elysium 4 was not mentioned, not because of secrecy, because any explanation would have sounded either like a lie or like panic. Outside official channels, everything spread as rumor. In San Francisco, people climbed the hills and looked at the sky, as if the answer should appear there. In Houston, spontaneous memorials formed outside the closed hangars of Argo 4. At times, it felt like the flowers weren't for children, but for their own former certainty. At the White House, the president convened the small group again. The message lay printed out in front of them. Even though no one was sure paper made sense here, paper made the text look like an order, and it wasn't an order. "We can try again," an advisor said, "even if they don't respond." The president didn't interrupt. "It only makes sense to act when there's someone to answer," she said. "Right now, there isn't." "We're talking about catastrophic risks," he insisted. "Your office requires a step, even a formal one." The president shook her head. "A formal step is something we need. It doesn't affect what's happening." The advisor fell quiet. "We have to state a position. At least record it," he added. "So later, it's clear where we stood." He spoke as if there were still a place to stand. The president looked at him. "In front of whom? Those who are no longer participating, or ourselves?" so we don't have to admit that the moment of choice has already passed. A pause. We're no longer choosing, she said. We're catching up to our own yesterday. The conversation didn't end. It just lost its direction, like a compass after the field has shifted. Across the country, people tried to understand what was happening without words for it. In a Phoenix suburb, an elderly man listened to the radio. They were talking about anomalies and signals. The host spoke evenly. Confusion leaked into the pauses. "You think it's them?" a woman asked as she came out of a store. He shook his head. "I don't think there's still a them. There's someone who no longer needs our answer." He added more quietly, "and no longer needs our consent." High above the Earth, satellites kept catching cosmic noise. Almost all of it was filtered out automatically. But one series of impulses failed the checks. It didn't repeat. It didn't resolve into a message. "This isn't a message," a technician said. "And it's not noise." He paused. "Too even for noise. Too empty for a message." "Then what is it?" "Looks like a trace," he said, as if something already passed through the observation zone. "Or would have," he added, "if we were looking differently." The calculations didn't line up. The models produced different pictures. None of them held. An engineer suggested expanding the model. Add another parameter, then another. The picture grew more complex and less coherent. The only consistent thing was this. The object, if it existed, was not moving toward Earth or away from it. It seemed to exist outside direction. "This isn't a trajectory," an analyst said. "It's a change in how we're observing." He ran a finger across the screen. "We're drawing lines of motion, but the surface we're drawing them on is changing." "Did they know?" the technician asked. The analyst didn't answer right away. "If they did," he said, "it wasn't a decision." He looked up. It was a statement of fact. Not "we decided," but "this is how it is now." By dawn, the data was on the table in Washington. The connection was stable. The conversation wasn't. Words wouldn't hold. Every term dragged old assumptions with it, and those assumptions no longer worked. "Is there a risk of collision?" someone asked directly. "The question assumes direction," Yvonne said. "We're no longer sure that applies." "So you can't assess the consequences?" "Consequences assume a chain," she said. "And we may be watching the conditions under which chains make sense fall away." A pause. "Then what is it?" The question hung. It wasn't asked because an answer was expected, but because that was how these discussions had always ended before. Yvonne didn't answer, because the question was still being asked from an old coordinate system. The president listened to the briefings without taking notes, and suddenly understood. Any request for a forecast now was a request for comfort. "If this isn't a threat," she said, "then maybe we're misunderstanding what a threat is." No one objected, not because they agreed, but because no one knew where objections now came from. In orbit, satellites began registering a stable distortion. It didn't disable systems. It caused no failures. It couldn't be localized. It was a condition. Inside it, familiar parameters still worked. Outside it, they stopped aligning. The boundary wasn't a line. It was a mode. They proposed observation. "For now, no action," they said. "It's not doing anything." The wording was convenient. It didn't require changing plans. "This isn't a barrier," an engineer said. "It's not holding anything back." "Then what does it do?" He shrugged. "It just exists." When the images reached the news, there was no panic. People saw a faint shimmer. Experts began explaining and lost confidence. Someone still tried to find a comparison, an atmospheric effect, a rare type of field. a visual anomaly. The analogies fell apart faster than they were spoken. Markets reacted not to the event itself, but to the impossibility of explaining it. The world didn't enter catastrophe mode. It kept living, gradually losing confidence that what was happening had to resolve into a coherent picture. In Seattle, Yvonne returned to the Elysium 4 archives. She wasn't comparing values. She was comparing form. There were no forecasts, only records. Applicable, not applicable. Beyond. As if they weren't writing about the future, but about the limits of questions. "We took it as a warning," she said to a colleague, "but it was a map." "So they knew?" Yvonne shook her head. "I'm not sure the word knew even applies here. Maybe they just stopped asking our questions." At that moment, the data changed, not abruptly, not as a failure. The distinctions that had once allowed readings to be compared simply disappeared. The instruments were functioning, but the picture wouldn't assemble. Operational no longer meant understandable. The president walked to the window. The city was alive. Nothing pointed to threat or salvation, but it became clear. Decisions would no longer be universal. Any choice would work only locally. Beyond that, consequences couldn't even be named. A record appeared on a backup channel. No source, no delivery. It was simply registered. Contact is impossible. We are no longer within the same system of mutual understanding. The message didn't require an answer. For a moment, the question arose whether they should answer anyway, not for the result, but to preserve the form of dialogue. The question wasn't formalized, it was simply remembered. An answer was possible. Symmetry no longer existed. What had once been called an object was neither approaching nor receding. It simply made one thing clear. The space in which humanity had grown, used to thinking of the future as shared, has a limit. And that limit isn't somewhere out there. It's already here. In the very way questions are asked, and beyond it, there was neither danger nor emptiness. There was simply no continuation of the future humanity had grown used to promising itself.